The war had been raging for 3 years. 3 years of retreat. Commander Vet stood at the observation port of the Eternal Tide, watching yet another planet burn. The third moon of K'rat, then the fourth. A week ago, 17 million people had lived there. Now, there was only smoke, silence, and the K'rat ships moving through the debris like teeth through bone. 3 years, 7 worlds, 460 billion dead. Vet turned away from the viewport. He could no longer bear to watch. The war room was full of his officers. Their faces spoke what their lips dared not. They were losing. They were always losing. The K'rat did not negotiate. The K'rat did not retreat. The K'rat were a collective consciousness that had been consuming galaxies for 2,000 years. And the coalition in Ahar had been in their path for the last 3 years. Every day, Ahar grew smaller. The Brennett fleet has vanished, Subcommander Rowe said. Her voice was steady. Steady. That was how one managed to survive such news. The last transmission from Admiral Toll came 6 hours ago. They held the Brennett station for 11 days. 11 days. Against the K'rat, 11 days was a miracle. It was not enough. Vet sat in his chair. It was made of wood from a planet that no longer existed. He sometimes noticed this sitting in a chair made from a dead world, looking at screens displaying other dying worlds, trying to invent something new. There was nothing new. They had tried everything. Massive assaults, surgical strikes, guerrilla tactics borrowed from species that had fought the K'rat before them and lost only slightly slower. The K'rat adapted to everything. The collective mind calculated every tactic used against it and adapted within days, sometimes within hours. What about the distress signals? Vet asked. Rowe checked her tablet. 42 species received the broadcast. 39 did not respond. 2 refused. She hesitated. 1 accepted. Which one? Humans. Silence filled the war room. The Vahari knew of humans. Everyone in this part of the galaxy knew of humans. A small species. 1 home world, 1 lunar colony. A handful of outposts on the edge of known space. They had achieved faster-than-light travel only 60 years ago. By any reasonable measure, they were a very young, very new, very small species. How many ships? Vet asked. 12. The K'rat had arrived at Brennett Station 400 strong. 12, Vet repeated. Quieter. Yes, Commander. And they thought 12 ships would help. They hadn't said it. Rowe held out the tablet. Vet read the message. It was short. It said, "We are coming. Do not engage the K'rat until we arrive. We need to observe them first." That was all. No promises, no speeches about alliance, honor, or shared survival, no assurances that everything would be fine. Just we are coming. Wait. And we need to observe them first. Vet returned the tablet. He didn't know what to think. How long until they arrive? He asked. 4 days. Tell the fleet to hold the Kazian line. No offensive actions. He looked out the viewport again. The smoke from the third moon spread like a thin gray veil against the stars. He thought, we can hold for 4 days. He wasn't sure he believed it. The humans arrived 4 days later, exactly as promised. Vet watched them through the relays. 12 ships. They were smaller than he expected, darker. They lacked the clean, elegant lines of Vahari warships or the massive hulls of the old Brennett destroyers. They looked functional, rough, as if built not to be admired, but to perform a specific job for a very long time. The flagship transmitted a signal on the coalition frequency. This is the carrier Adamant. General Mira Kane commanding. Requesting permission to dock a shuttle. Permission granted, Vet replied. The shuttle was just as dark and rough. It docked without ceremony. General Mira Kane stepped out 12 minutes later, and Vet's first thought was, she is very small. She was shorter than most of her subordinates. She had a bristly, graying buzz, cut and dark, calm eyes that moved across the docking bay like a scanner surveying terrain. Not looking for beauty, looking for information. Every surface, every exit, every face was catalogued, recorded, and saved somewhere behind those eyes for later use. She crossed the bay and shook Vet's hand. Humans did that. He had read about it. Her grip said, I am here. I am real. I will not leave. Commander Vet, she said. General Kane, welcome to the Eternal Tide. Thank you. She scanned the bay once more. Where can I see your combat records? Not nice to meet you. Not we sympathize with your losses. Not we are here to help. Where can I see your combat records? We have prepared a briefing, Vet answered. Good, a small nod. How long have you been fighting the K'rat? 3 years. Something flickered in her eyes. It appeared and vanished very quickly. 3 years without a break in their offensive? None? They never used the same formation twice. The question was unexpected. Vet looked at Ro. Ro checked the files. There have been similarities in formations, but we have found no exact repetitions. Kane nodded slowly as if to herself. They adapt. Yes. How quickly? Days? Hours after a failed battle? She made a short sound. Not worry, not surprise. The sound a human makes when something they suspected turns out to be true. Take me to the briefing, she said. The briefing lasted 6 hours. Kane did not say a word for the first 4. She had brought 2 people with her, a tall man named Sergeant Harlan, whose face was so broken and healed that the scars had become part of his structure, quiet and unobtrusive, and a young woman named Lieutenant Senna, who recorded data in a paper notebook with a physical pen for the entire briefing. The Vihari officers were puzzled. Physical notes, paper, as if she didn't trust anything that could be erased. Vet watched as the humans observed his data, combat maps, casualty figures, and tactical failures recorded in detail because the dead deserved at least that much. Lost worlds with population counts. The only time the coalition had held a position Outpost 7 on the Drell Belt, and what happened to it 8 months after the celebration. Kane watched it all without emotion. Calm, focused. In her stillness was something that was not peace. It was self-control. Like a stream held back by a dam she had built long ago and maintained by habit. At the beginning of the 5th hour, she said, "What is your main tactical problem?" Vet thought, "We cannot predict their movements. Every time we build a defensive line, they find a way through it or around it because they adapt to your defense." "Yes." "Then stop defending," Kane said. The room went quiet. "We have tried offensive operations," Rose said, carefully. "Not challenging, just careful. The results were not that kind of offensive." Kane stood. She walked to the battle map and poked a point deep behind the K'rat lines, a communication station marked in red on the display. "What is this?" "That is a K'rat communications node. We identified it 8 months ago and tried to strike it directly." "What happened?" "We lost 40 ships. The K'rat responded within 3 minutes with forces 3 times the size of our strike group. They foresaw it." "They didn't foresee it," Kane said. "They felt it coming. 40 ships make a lot of noise." She stepped back. "What is the minimum force that could reach that station?" Vet didn't understand the question. "We would need to allocate enough firepower to suppress the station's defenses. Minimum. Discard the extra. If you sent the smallest fraction, 3 or 4 ships, perhaps. But the defensive grid would destroy them before." "What if they weren't ships?" Kane asked. The room went very quiet. "What are you suggesting?" Vet asked. Kane looked at Sergeant Harlan. Harlan looked at her. Between them passed something for which there were no words. An old understanding, one built on shared experience in which no one else had participated. "I suggest," Kane said slowly, "that you have fought this war as you know how to fight, and the K'rat have reacted as they know how to react. And that is why you are losing. You give them exactly what they expect." She looked at the map. "You need to stop giving them things they know how to process." "And humans know how to do this?" Ro asked. There was something in her voice not quite like doubt, more tired than doubt. Kane looked at her firmly. "We have had plenty of time to practice being unpredictable. We were very good at it even before we had starships." She said it without pride, without threat, as if it were simply a fact of their history, like the color of their star or the gravity of their home world, what they were born with and what they learned. Ro did not answer. That night, Vet sat alone in the command room and thought about the humans. He had read about them, of course. Everyone had. A young species, 60 years in space. One home world, recorded history that their own scientists described with words like catastrophic, relentless, and cyclical. Wars lasting centuries. Wars over strips of land smaller than most space stations. Wars over ideas that could not be touched or measured. Wars sometimes over almost nothing, driven by something inside the human animal that had no simple name. They had nearly destroyed themselves twice. Once with weapons that split atoms and poisoned the Earth for generations. Once with something slower, a collapse of the systems they had built, upon which they depended and which they had pushed to the breaking point. 30 years of that. 2 billion dead, billions displaced. Their entire civilization cracked like a hull breach, and they emerged from it. They emerged, built ships, and reached the stars. And here they were, 12 blunt, dark ships on the edge of a war that wasn't theirs, sent by a species that had spent most of its own history killing itself with breathtaking ingenuity. Vet was a student of the history of other peoples. He had studied many species. He had never found another that had come so close to self-extinction and continued to exist, despite everything. He thought he understood it a little now. The survivors weren't the strongest. The survivors were those who adapted, who found something new when everything familiar was destroyed. Who had, and this was the part he kept returning to, an almost structural refusal to admit that defeat was the end of the story. The K'rat adapted to what they observed. Humans adapted to everything, including things no one had ever seen. He thought about Kane's question. The smallest force, the least firepower, the quietest, the most invisible. He thought about the wood in his chair, the planet it was born from, the people who had lived there, who were now ash, who existed only in records and the memories of those who knew them. He thought about the 17 million on the third moon. The fourth. He thought about what another 3 years of this would look like. He opened the comms. "General Kane," he said, "I would like to continue our conversation." Her reply came in less than a minute. "I was hoping you would say that." They talked until the station shifted to its night mode, the dim blue light the Vahari used to mark sleep hours. Kane didn't seem to need sleep, or she did, but considered it optional. Vet couldn't understand. She spoke of the K'rat as an engineer speaks of a collapsing structure, hunting for stress points, places where the load was uneven, joints that might break if one knew exactly where to press. She had spent 3 days reading all of Vet's records on the K'rat, all combat logs, all field reports, all failed strategies submitted by officers who were mostly dead, and she had built a picture of them different from the one Vet had constructed over 3 years of defeat. "They think as a mass," she said. "Each K'rat is connected to the whole, which makes them fast. Collective processing, collective response. But that also means they cannot divide, they cannot individualize," Kane corrected. "They have no concept of one unit making a choice that the others don't immediately know about. One soldier moving without the hive's knowledge, one action performed in genuine secret." She tapped the table once. "They have no concept of secrecy." Vet fell silent. He sat with that thought for a long moment. "We are going to use that," Kane said. "How?" she told him. When she finished, the command room was very quiet. Sergeant Harlan, who had stood by the door for 6 hours without sitting, complaining, or asking for water, let out a slow breath. Not fear, something older than fear. The look of a man lifting a weight he had carried before and knew well enough to hate it. "It will work," Kane said. "If your people trust us and follow us, they will follow," Vet said. He was sincere. He looked at her and thought of the chair beneath him, made of wood from a dead world, and thought, "We have nothing to lose, nothing but the worlds that remain." He also, for the first time in 3 years, thought of something that was not despair. He couldn't name it yet. It was too new, too small and careful to give a name. "When do we start?" he asked. "In 6 days," Kane replied. "We will perform reconnaissance first. Sergeant Harlan needs to get close to that comms node. He needs to see it with his own eyes." Vet looked at Harlan. "Ghost," he said. "You promised to explain the nickname." Harlan looked at him. That flat, broken, healed face. A small smile on it, patient and heatless. "I will show you instead," Harlan said. He said it like a promise that had already been kept in dark places where no one was looking. Vet nodded. Outside the viewport, stars burned. The K'rat fleet was somewhere out there, moving, adapting, consuming, waiting for the next defensive line to break through. They never had to wait for what they couldn't foresee. In 4 days, they still wouldn't know what was coming, but they would find out. Sergeant Dev Harlan had been called Ghost for 11 years. He got the nickname after a night in the Ural Mountains, when a team of 6 entered a complex controlled by 40 armed men and came back out with 3 hostages. And the 40 armed men hadn't known anything happened until they found their cameras looping empty footage, their communications cut at the roots, and the 3 prisoners simply vanished, as if they had never been there, as if a ghost had taken them. That was the story. That was the beginning of the name. But the name lived on because it continued to be true, year after year, operation after operation. Harlan moved through secured space like water through rock, not with force, but by finding the places where force wasn't needed. Being patient, being small, quiet, and invisible, in a way that only a very dangerous man could be invisible, because danger doesn't always announce itself. And the most dangerous things in any environment are often those you cannot see. Now, he floated 300 meters from a K'rat relay in a suit that cost more than some of the planets the K'rat had destroyed. And he watched. He watched for 2 days. He ate rations from a tube without tasting them. He slept in 4-hour cycles, checking the passive sensors each time upon waking. He recorded everything the suit's systems could record, and he recorded what the suit could not. Things that could only be seen and understood by a human brain with 11 years of practice. The patterns, the rhythms, how the K'rat patrol drones moved in arcs that were perfectly calculated and therefore perfectly predictable. A 1-2 minute gap in the Eastern sensor network when 2 patrol routes crossed and their signals merged. How the station itself pulsed with light, not randomly, but in a sequence, reporting status back to the hive with regular flashes. The fact that the station was never, not once in 48 hours, completely dark, because the hive was always listening, because the hive always needed to know the station was there. Harlan noted it all. He noted it in the specific manner he had trained himself to think, not in terms of threat, but in terms of seams. Every secured thing had seams, places where 2 systems met and didn't quite fit perfectly together. Places where the design assumed a certain type of attack and left a gap for a type of attack it couldn't imagine. The K'rat couldn't imagine him. On the second day, he found a seam. He pressed the transmit key twice. 2 short pulses. The code for, "I have what I need," returning. He turned in the dark and began the long drift home. 12 minutes, he said to Kane. They were in the briefing room. Maps on every surface. Coffee was cooling in a cup no one had touched. It was late, or what passed for late when you were in deep space and time was mostly a choice. The Eastern sensors go blind for 12 minutes when the patrol routes cross. That is the window. Kane studied the map. 12 minutes for insertion and placement. Yes, then we wait for their next comms burst to the hive. How often? Every 4 hours exactly. The station pulses status. When it does, the hive will receive an unexpected signal instead. Harlan paused. If we do this right, the hive won't know what it received until it's too late to matter. Lieutenant Senna was doing calculations on her physical tablet. How many in the deployment group? 2, Harlan said. Any more than 2, and we'll show up on passive sensors even in the blind window. 2 people, Vet said. He sat at the end of the table. He had been very quiet since the briefing began, listening. Vet was, Harlan had decided, a good listener, which was rarer than it should be. 2 people to disable a station that repelled 40 of our warships. Harlan looked at him. We aren't going to disable it, he said. Then what? We are going to change it, Kane said. She stood. Commander, the K'rat Hive communicates through this station. They trust the station because the station has always told them the truth, every 4 hours. Here is our position. Here is our strength. Here is what we see. She placed a hand on the map. We are going to make the station lie. Vet was very still. You can do that? Senna can, Kane said and looked at her lieutenant. Senna looked up from her tablet. She was young enough that Vet had initially assumed she was some sort of assistant. She had a small, serious face and that same stillness that had nothing to do with calmness and everything to do with focus. I have been studying their signal architecture since we arrived, Senna said. Their comms language is complex, but it is rigid. No variations, no improvisation. She put down her pen. They do not lie to each other. They have no mechanism for it, which means they also have no mechanism for detecting it. The room was quiet. We inject a false status signal into the 4-hour burst, she continued. The station tells the hive that a certain sector is clear, that a certain coalition defensive position is weak and understaffed, that a gap in the Cassian line is an opportunity. You are going to trick the hive into walking right into a trap, Vet said slowly. We are going to force the hive to lead itself into a trap, Kane said. They are different things. We aren't forcing them. We are making them believe they chose it. Vet looked at her for a long time. In the culture in Ahar, there is a saying, he said. The best trap is the one the prey builds for itself. Kane's expression barely changed, but something in it shifted. We have the same saying, she said, more or less. Harlan and Senna left 4 days later in a 2-man insertion craft, less a ship, more the absence of a ship. A hull designed specifically to swallow radar, light, and heat, to look like background noise in the electromagnetic spectrum, to be nothing. They crossed the 300 kilometers of monitored space in 4 hours and 10 minutes. They entered the 12-minute window with 40 seconds to spare. Harlan moved first. He had done this often enough that his body performed the work without full instructions from his brain. Muscle memory took over. Every movement was precise and minimal, nothing extra. He neutralized 2 external access sensors with tools the size of a thumb. No explosion, no visible damage. They would read as operational when the patrol passed. Senna moved to the station's access port behind him. Inside, the station was automated. No, K'rat, they weren't needed. The Hive didn't keep bodies where machines could manage. This was the thing the K'rat Hive had never had to think about. An uninhabited post was also unguarded in the ways that mattered most. Senna worked in silence. Her hands were perfectly steady. She had been doing this kind of work since she was 22, not penetration, but a quieter version, the one that happened in code and signals and the hidden language machines used to talk to each other. She had hacked 3 different classified comms architectures before she turned 30. The K'rat architecture was more complex than 2 of them and simpler than 1. 9 minutes. She found the signal layer. She found the authentication key the station used to confirm its identity to the Hive. She didn't hack it, she copied it. Then she built a shadow transmitter, a secondary device no larger than a playing card, connected to the station's power source, invisible behind a panel that hadn't been opened since the station was built. And she gave it the key. And she gave it a specific set of false status reports. And she gave it a timer. 11 minutes and 40 seconds after they entered, they were back outside. The station looked exactly as it had. It pulsed light into the dark, reporting, telling the Hive that all was well, all was as it should be. It would tell the Hive the same thing in 4 hours when the burst occurred. It would lie. Aboard the Eternal Tide, the Coalition officers watched the data Senna had laid out, and they were quiet in the way people are when trying to understand something that shouldn't be possible. The false signal would transmit in. Senna checked her tablet. 6 hours. The Hive will receive a report that the northern flank of the Kasian line is 30% full, that the Vahari fleet has retreated to the Drell approach. Both statements are false, Vet said. Both statements are false, Senna confirmed. When the K'rat receive this, they will calculate it against their other intelligence, and they will see an opportunity. They will redirect their forward forces to the northern flank of the Kasian line, Rowe said. To the northern flank of the Kasian line, Kane said, which will be fully staffed and will have our ships in support. It's a trap, said one of the Vahari officers, a broad-shouldered man named Commander Fell, who had been skeptical of humans since they arrived. Yes, Kane said. Fell paused. We have tried traps before, he finally said. Not like this. Every trap you have tried, the K'rat had an intelligence that warned them. They have sensors everywhere, eyes everywhere. They process everything. Kane looked at him evenly. But they cannot process a signal they trust. They cannot adapt to information they believe is true. That is the point. Fell still wasn't convinced. Vet saw it in his face. The weight of 3 years pressing down on every new idea. 3 years of ideas that had all failed in the end. And if it doesn't work? Fell asked. Kane looked at him. Then we try something else, she said. We have a list. A moment of silence fell. A list, Fell repeated. A long one, Harlan said from the door. He had changed out of his insertion gear and was drinking something from a dark metal cup. He said it without any special feeling. Just, yes, a list. We have been doing this a long time, and the list is long. Fell looked at Harlan, looked at Kane, looked at Vet. Vet nodded once. Fell leaned back in his chair. The plan began to execute. 6 hours later, the false signal was transmitted. The Hive received it, processed it, merged it with 3 weeks of careful intelligence that the humans had also been very quietly, very patiently, feeding it through 2 other compromised relay points no one in the Coalition knew about, until Senna found them and intercepted control. The K'rat saw an opportunity, a breach in a moment of Coalition weakness on the northern flank of the Kasian line. The K'rat did not hesitate. Hesitation was not in their nature. The Hive saw the opening and moved to fill it, because that was what the Hive always had done for the last 2,000 years. It moved into breaches with overwhelming force, closed them, expanded, and moved into the next breach. They directed 312 ships to the northern Kasian approach into the waiting guns of the Coalition fleet. The battle lasted 4 hours. The K'rat lost 89 ships. They had never lost that many in a single battle in the entire 3-year war. They had never been surprised before. They had processed every enemy signal, every troop movement, every tactical decision, and they had always known. They did not know. They retreated from the Kasian line for the first time in 14 months. In the war room of the Eternal Tide, the officers who hadn't celebrated a victory in 3 years were very noisy. Rowe squeezed Vet's hand. Commander Fell had both hands on the back of his chair, leaning forward, and his face was doing something. something it hadn't done in a long time. Vet looked at Kane. Kane was watching the tactical display. She wasn't celebrating. Her expression was the same as always, focused, firm, restrained, but something new had appeared in it. Something small, hard, and bright. "They adapt," she said quietly. "They will figure out the relay was compromised. They will audit their other stations." "How long?" Vet asked. "A week? Maybe 2? She looked at him. "We won't use this method again, but we won't need to, because you have a list." "Because we have a list," she said. Outside, the stars burned. The K'rat fleet was there in the dark, retreating, processing a defeat it didn't believe was possible, hunting for the source of the lie, hunting for what had changed. They were looking in the right direction. They just didn't know yet what they were looking at. The K'rat did what they always did after a defeat. They returned with greater force. 11 days after the ambush at the Kasian line, the Hive sent 470 ships to the most critical replenishment point of the Vahari, a station called Achievement 7, sitting at the intersection of 3 coalition supply lines. If Achievement 7 fell, the entire front would start to starve in a few weeks. No fuel, no ammunition, no spare parts for damaged ships. The coalition's combat power would drop by half in a month and by 3/4 in 2, and after that, there would be nothing left to fight with. The K'rat knew this. The Hive had been lining up for Achievement 7 for months, and the Kasian loss didn't change the plan. It accelerated it. The Hive had processed the ambush and concluded, the coalition is still trying something new. The answer to something new is to end the game before the new things become relevant. 470 ships. The coalition had 93 available ships to defend Achievement 7. Vet looked at the numbers on his screen, and for a moment, the 3 years of loss pressed down on him with physical weight. Then he looked at the 12 human ships and thought about what Kane had said in their very first conversation. "Stop defending." "I know," Kane said before he could speak. She was already at the tactical display. "We have been tracking their fleet movement for 6 days. You knew they would come here." "I suspected." Achievement 7, the logical target. They cannot react to one surprise, so they go for the one that removes the need for future surprises. She pulled up the formation data. "Look at this, 470 ships, but look at how they are arranged." Vet looked. He had been looking at K'rat formations for 3 years. He knew them better than he wanted to. "Standard approach with overwhelming force," he said. "They expect to go straight through any defense." "Yes, straight through. Forward movement, mass in front, overwhelming the center." Kane tapped the outer edges of the formation on the display. "The flanks are light, the rears are almost non-existent, because they never needed a rear guard. No one ever went behind the K'rat vanguard, because going behind the K'rat vanguard means going through it," Vet said. "Or around it." She looked at him. "Or under it, if the terrain is right." The terrain of space wasn't terrain in the traditional sense, but gravitational geography, density fields, debris clusters, places where conventional engines strained and sensor arrays confused due to background noise. It was terrain, and Kane had spent 11 days mapping it. She showed him. The plan was, by Vahari standards, almost too simple to be taken seriously. The 93 coalition ships would form a defensive line directly in the path of the K'rat. Loud, obvious, exactly what the K'rat expected, exactly what they had been breaking for 3 years. The K'rat would come at them hard. The humans would be somewhere else entirely. "We will pass through the Venn debris field," Kane said. "It will shred our sensor arrays if we are not careful, but it will also block their sensors completely. We will pass through it. We will emerge behind them, and then you will strike their rear while they are focused on our front," Vet said. "While they are confident they are about to win," Kane said. "The moment the enemy is certain they are winning is the moment they are least prepared for something to go wrong." Vet thought about it. "They will adapt. They will turn to face you. Some of them. And when they turn, your people will strike the center while it is unprotected. We will hold them in 2 directions simultaneously. The Hive is fast at processing one problem. 2 simultaneous problems from opposite directions. Can it process both? We don't know," she paused, "but we know it has never had to try before." There were other officers who had opinions on the plan. Commander Fell was the lead among them. "We are directing our remaining operational fleet into a defensive line that has to look weak," he said at the meeting that followed. "We need them to believe we are collapsing. So we show them a defensive line, and we let them hit it, and we absorb the damage while we wait for the humans to get behind them." He looked at Kane. "How long for your ships to cross the Venn debris field?" Best estimate, 3 hours. 3 hours where the K'rat hit us with 470 ships. Yes. Fell silent for a moment. His hands lay flat on the table. His voice was very controlled. We have 93 ships. Yes, against 470. Yes, for 3 hours. Fell looked at Vet. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Vet looked at Kane. It is possible, she said. Can 93 ships hold against 470 for 3 hours? It depends on how they hold. If you try to match them force against force, no, you will lose in 40 minutes. Then how? You don't fight them on their terms. You fight the way humans fight when they are outnumbered and they know it, and they still refuse to leave. She paused. You make every engagement cost them more than it should. You don't defend a line, you defend a concept. You make retreat impossible by making it meaningless. Every meter they take must be paid for so dearly that their offensive slows to zero. A war of attrition, Rose said. A war of costs, Kane said. You make the attack too expensive to complete quickly. Buy us time. That is all we need. Fell looked at his hands. He looked at Vet. He looked at the tactical display. The Brennet fleet held for 11 days, he said quietly. And we are asking for 3 hours, Vet said. Fell closed his eyes for a moment. 3 hours, he said. He opened them. Take your ships through that debris field, General. The K'rat came 12 hours later, as predicted. They came in mass, in the standard, overwhelming formation that had broken every coalition defense for 3 years, with 470 ships arranged in a forward wedge so dense it registered on sensors as a solid wall of hostile intent. The 93 coalition ships formed their line. They looked from the outside exactly as they were, not enough ships trying to hold too much space. The K'rat would see that, and the K'rat would see right through them. For 40 minutes, per their pattern of previous engagements, the K'rat entered fast, and the coalition did not try to match them. The outer wings of the coalition line split and retreated, and split again, like water around a thrown stone. And the K'rat swept through the breaches and into a trap within the breaches, because the ships that moved weren't retreating. They were redeploying, and every redeployed ship was exactly where it needed to be to strike the K'rat vanguard from a new angle once it passed. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't a battle that would be remembered for its beauty. It was grueling and loud. And the coalition took damage, heavy damage, because 93 ships couldn't take 470 head-on. No matter how smartly they moved, ships went dark, ships lost atmosphere, ships took hits they could survive and hits they could not. And the crews on board did what crews do when the ship around them is falling apart. Some of them died, some fought, and all of them held. They held not because they were winning. They weren't winning. They were losing slowly and intentionally. And they were losing at great cost to the K'rat. And they were losing in one direction, losing in a controlled manner, losing while holding the K'rat vanguard tied to a specific corridor, so it couldn't spread, so the wedge stayed a wedge and didn't become a flood. 2 hours and 40 minutes into the battle, a coalition frigate named Steadfast took a hit that killed its engines and turned it broadside into the path of the advance. It was a small ship. It shouldn't have mattered. The crew of the Steadfast chose not to evacuate. They used the ship itself as a weapon, channeling all remaining systems, guns, energy cells, emergency engines to full power until the ship tore itself apart. And they tore 17 K'rat ships apart with it, and they bought 11 additional minutes. 11 minutes. After 11 minutes, the human ships passed through the Venn debris field. They came low, dark, and very, very fast. 12 ships against 470. 12 ships should have been nothing, should have been a footnote. They were not nothing. They struck the K'rat rear in a pattern that had no direct equivalent in any tactical database the K'rat collective consciousness had collected. Because it wasn't a pattern in the traditional sense, it was controlled chaos. Every human ship acted independently, finding its targets, making its own decisions. No central coordination beyond one shared goal. Do not let them turn and regroup. The K'rat rear turned. The coalition center struck the vanguard from both sides. The Hive processed 2 simultaneous problems from opposite directions, something it had never faced before, something for which it had no template. Its communications began to conflict. Orders went out that contradicted each other. Ships turned in one direction, then another, then back again. Aboard the Adamant, General Kane watched the formation data and remained silent for a long time. Then she said, "Quiet. What is it?" Senna asked. "The seam," Kane said. Right there. The hive is stuttering. She opened the command channel. All ships, she said. Strike that breach. Everything we have. Now. They struck the breach. The K'rat formation broke, not collapsed. The K'rat didn't collapse. They compressed, regrouped, retreated 300 kilometers in 12 minutes, and reformed, and the battle didn't end. But the formation was broken, and the advance had stopped, and Achievement 7 was still standing. For the second time in 11 days, the K'rat didn't take what they came for. Aboard the Eternal Tide, Vet stood in the war room, surrounded by officers who were exhausted, damaged, full of grief, and something else. That something else was unfamiliar. It took him a moment to identify it. Dangerous, he thought. We feel dangerous. He looked at the list of lost ships. Steadfast was on it. He would record the names of the Steadfast crew himself. Later, alone, by Vahari tradition, the record of those who gave their lives voluntarily. He looked at the list of K'rat ships destroyed in battle. 112 inches, one battle, 112 against 14. The K'rat had never traded numbers like that. Not once in 3 years. His comm signaled. Kane. Commander, she said. Her voice was the same as always, calm, steady, and functional. They will return. More ships this time. I know, he said. We need to talk about Phase 2. I know that too. A pause. Short. Your crew on the Steadfast, she said. They didn't have to do that. No, Vet said. No, they gave us a window. Yes. He looked at the wall, at the void. They have held windows open for 3 years. Every crew we lost held a window for. Something that was supposed to come through it, and never did. He fell silent. Something has come through it. Kane was silent for a moment on the other end. Something will come through all of them, she said. It wasn't comfort. She didn't mean it as such. She said it as a calculation, as a fact she had come to through work. He believed her anyway. Outside, the stars burned. The K'rat fleet was there in the deep dark, regrouping, processing, looking for the shape of what had just happened to it, trying to find a pattern. There was no pattern for this. That was the point. The hive had never known fear. It wasn't designed for it. Fear was fundamentally a mechanism for individuals, a signal sent by one part of a system to the whole, saying, danger is here. Change course. Protect yourself. Individual beings needed fear because they were alone. They could be separated from the group. They could be targeted. They could be cut off. The K'rat collective consciousness was never alone. It couldn't be targeted the way individual things could be targeted. It couldn't be cut off from itself, because it was itself everywhere, spread across thousands of ships and millions of bodies and the massive communications network that connected them all. There was no eye to protect. There was only the hive. And so, the hive processed threats the way all collective systems process threats. Not with fear, but with a response. Stimulus, processing, counter-response. The K'rat had done this for 2,000 years. Every species they encountered presented new stimuli. The hive had processed them all. But something was happening to the hive's processing in the 17 days since the ambush at the Cassian line. The stimuli weren't resolving cleanly. The relay deception had been uncovered. The hive had audited every connection point in its forward network, found 2 more compromised stations, and neutralized them. That was clean. That was solvable. The hive realized someone had lied to it, found the mechanism of the lie, and removed it. But the battle at Achievement 7 hadn't resolved cleanly. The hive ran the battle data 14 times. 14 full analyses of the combat record, and every time there was a part of the record that yielded contradictory conclusions. 12 human ships. The hive had records on human vessels. Humans were new in space, limited in number, technically inferior to almost every established military force in the region. Their ships were small. Their weapons were standard. Their shields were by any measurement below average. The hive had records of 12 human ships doing things that, as the hive's models predicted, they shouldn't have been capable of doing. Movement without pattern. Real-time adaptation to targets that, per the hive's models, shouldn't have been predictable for them. Strikes on weak points in the K'rat rear formation that the hive hadn't known were weak points until the weapons were already there. The hive made a request. It searched its historical records for every species it had ever encountered and pulled every record of unexpected behavior that caused processing errors. The results were sorted by purity. Humans were not in the results. They had only been in space for 60 years. They had never crossed paths with the K'rat before this. The hive created a new file. It placed them in a category that, until now, had only had 3 entries in 2,000 years. The category had no accurate translation in any language the coalition in Ahar used. But the closest equivalent was unknown mechanism of action. That was the Hive's way of saying, we don't know why this works, and we don't know how to stop it. That was as close to fear as the K'rat collective consciousness ever produced. General Kane read the intelligence report that Senna had compiled from intercepted Hive communications, and she read it 3 times. Then she put it down and looked at the ceiling of her cabin for a long moment. They are confused, Senna said. She sat across from Kane with her physical tablet. Her pen moved in small, hard lines. The processing errors we created at Achievement 7 are still propagating. The Hive is running the same analysis and keeps getting the same contradictory result. It cannot correctly classify us. How long until they do? Kane asked. Unknown. Maybe days, maybe longer. Their adaptation process is designed for tactics and formations, for things that have rules, even if they are new rules. Senna tapped her pen twice on the tablet. What they are struggling with is that we don't seem to have consistent rules. We don't fight the same way twice. Every decision looks different from the outside because every decision is different, Kane said. Every situation is different. Correct. But the Hive doesn't process it that way. It is looking for a master algorithm, a root pattern. Senna paused. It will find it eventually. Every behavior system has a pattern. A pattern is an adaptation, Kane said. And adapting to an adaptation is impossible. You can study it. You can study it forever. Humans have been studying us for a long time. Kane leaned forward. She picked up the intelligence report again. The key is that they are confused now. And confused is a window. She looked at Harlan, who sat in the corner. He always sat in corners. Phase 2. What does it look like? Harlan had been quiet for most of the meeting. He was eating something from a container and thinking, and the 2 activities seemed to fully occupy him. Ready, he said. Tell me about the K'rat command node in Grid 7, Alpha. Triple the protection compared to what was at the relay, Harlan said. A constant patrol instead of automated drones. The node itself is buried inside an asteroid installation, which gives them natural shielding. The access point is a single shaft drilled into the rock. He paused. 2 points. The asteroid rotates on a 2-2-hour cycle, which creates a 90-minute window where the installation's main weapons batteries are in the shadow. And the constant patrol has a shift change every 6 hours. And that shift change creates a 3-minute overlap when both patrols, incoming and outgoing, are in transit simultaneously. A 3-minute window, Kane said. Senna needs less. Senna looked up. Much less, she confirmed. Kane looked at the map. Grid 7, Alpha was 2 days' travel from their current position. The K'rat were also currently positioned for what all indicators suggested would be a major push. Their third attempt larger than any of the first 2. The Hive was allocating forces on a scale that said directly, this will not fail. Timeline, Kane said. If we leave now, we strike the 7. Alpha grid in 42 hours, Harlan said. Before the K'rat launch their main push. We will put the node to sleep before the Hive can coordinate the attack properly. And if we aren't fast enough, then the K'rat will launch the attack before the node is disabled, and we will have to fight through all of that without the advantage. He put down his container. We will be fast enough. He said it the way he said most things, flat, unhurried, and without space left for talk of going anywhere else. Vet heard the plan and agreed immediately, which surprised his own officers. Commander Fell said, Commander, we are sending 2 people into the heart of the K'rat vanguard to disable their primary command coordination while simultaneously preparing to meet their largest offensive? Yes, Vet said. 2 people. That is also correct. Ro looked at him. Her expression was the one she had worn for 3 years, cautious, exhausted, and carrying the weight of 460 billion dead behind her eyes. But under it, something was there now? Something she was choosing? Do you trust them? She asked. Not a question. I trust the results, Vet said. 2 ambushes, 2 K'rat retreats. These are the only retreats in 3 years. He looked at his chair, at the wood from the dead world. And I trust that whatever humans have brought to this war, the K'rat have no category for it. The Hive is learning, Ro said. It always learns. Then we must move faster than it learns, Vet said. Which means, now. Harlan and Senna crossed the border into K'rat-controlled space alone. No support ships, no backup. An insertion craft so dark and cold that to anything searching for it, it looked like a piece of dead rock drifting between systems. Senna slept during the transit, which Harlan found medically impressive. He had seen her do it before. 12 minutes here, 20 minutes there, perfectly calibrated against the mission timing. Her body obeyed her schedule with the loyalty of a well-trained machine. He did not sleep. He watched the sensor readings and ate cold food, and thought about the mission the way he had trained himself to think about missions, not about the whole, not about everything at once. Only the next step. Always only the next step. Step 1, reach the asteroid installation. Step 2, time the rotation. Step 3, enter the window. They reached the asteroid installation in 41 hours. Harlan watched the installation for 6 hours before he moved. He watched the patrol rhythm. He watched the shift rotation. He watched how the light caught the rock faces when the asteroid turned and counted the shadow patterns and recorded them. Then he touched Senna's shoulder, and she woke in 3 seconds, fully present, the pen already in her hand by habit. 20 minutes, he said. She nodded. The installation was protected exactly as he said. Triple stations, constant patrols, weapons, batteries in calculated positions on the rock surface. From 100 meters away, it looked impregnable. Harlan had spent 11 years studying that impregnable things are full of seams. He found the seam a service access conduit on the asteroid's inner rotating face, not designed as an entry point, designed as service space for the installation's water recycling system, a detail so common that whoever designed the installation's defense apparently never thought about it. You don't put a guard on a water pipe. They entered through the water pipes. Inside, the node was vast and loud in a way that had nothing to do with sound. It pulsed. The hive's communications passed through it in a constant stream of data, signal upon signal upon signal, and Senna could feel the weight of it, like pressure on her teeth. Even before she pulled out her tools, the hive was busy. The hive was coordinating the incoming push. Thousands of ships moving, supplies being directed, attack vectors calculated in a massive distributed brain that had no center, but this node was one of its main connections. She didn't touch any of that. She didn't need to. She needed to be inside, listening. She needed to find the specific push coordination frequency signature, and she needed to plant a delay. Not a lie this time, not a false signal. Something simpler. Static. Very precise. Very targeted static. A jamming procedure that would sit in sleep mode inside the node's own comms, stream until the attack started, and then it would wake up and introduce exactly 7.4 seconds of lag into every command signal the node sent. 7.4 seconds. It was almost nothing. In human terms, it was a blink and a half. In a conventional war, it would have had very little significance. In a hive war, where the movement of every ship was coordinated by simultaneous commands, where the timing of a formation's advance was measured in fractions of a second, 7.4 seconds was the difference between a wall and an opening. She worked for 9 minutes. She planted the procedure. She retreated through the water pipes. Harlan waited at the extraction point. He looked at her face. "Done," he said. "Done," she said. They left. Behind them, the installation continued to pulse, sending its streams of coordination data out through the hive. The procedure sat inside the stream, sleeping, patient, waiting for the exact moment it would wake up. It didn't look like anything. It didn't look like a trap. It was just 7.4 seconds. The K'rat launched their third push 6 hours after Harlan and Senna returned to the Coalition fleet. 630 ships, the largest single force the K'rat had committed to this war. Enough ships that the Eternal Tide sensor array showed them not as individual signals, but as a mass front, a weather system moving toward the Coalition's position. In the war room, no one spoke for a full minute. Then Rose said, "They are confident." "Good," Kane said. She didn't look afraid. She looked as she always looked, working, building toward something behind those hard eyes, the gears moving. "When will they enter attack formation?" she asked Vet. "The node on 7, Alpha, will release its coordination signal. The signal will be 7.4 seconds late." 7 seconds, Fell said. He was at the table, arms crossed. He had been a skeptic when the humans arrived. He wasn't a skeptic anymore, but he was cautious. Being cautious was how you survived. What do 7 seconds do to 630 ships? Kane looked at him. "The forward formation will be 7 seconds ahead of the flanks," she said. "The flanks will be 7 seconds behind the reserves. The attack will look like one from a distance and will be 3 separate things at close range." She paused. "The K'rat have never misfired before. The hive always coordinates perfectly, so the fleet will continue to advance, even when the timing breaks, because each part of the hive will assume the other parts are correct, and they themselves are the error. They will attack out of sequence, Vet said slowly. They will attack themselves, Kane said. Unintentionally, not catastrophically, but enough. Enough for what? She looked at him. Enough for your people to do what they have been waiting 3 years to do, she said. Strike back, truly strike. Not just hold, not just survive, strike them, and keep striking, and do not stop. Vet looked at the display. 630 ships moving like a tide. He thought of the steadfast, of the crew that chose to stay, of the 11 minutes they had bought, the only thing they had left. He thought of the 3 years of holding windows open for, something that was supposed to come through them. All ships, he said into the command channel. Prepare for battle. He straightened in his chair. This time, he said, we aren't just holding the line, we are passing through it. The fleet responded. Outside, the K'rat vanguard rolled forward. 630 ships moving with the absolute confidence of a hive that had never lost a major engagement, never been surprised, never found something it couldn't process and overcome. The confidence was about to develop a crack small as 7 seconds, wide as everything. The K'rat vanguard arrived in perfect formation. 630 ships, arranged in a wedge that had broken every defensive line for 3 years, moving with coordinated speed. The forward edge dense with firepower, the flanks spreading wide to prevent the encirclement tactic the coalition had last tried at Achievement 7. They had processed the last 2 engagements. They had adapted. The formation showed it. Denser flanks, a stronger rearguard, the breaches they had shown before now closed. 30 seconds after the coalition fleet appeared on sensors, the K'rat formation looked unstoppable. Then the coordination signal from Grid 7, Alpha reached them 7.4 seconds late. It wasn't visible. No ship changed course dramatically. No formation visually broke. From the outside, nothing seemed to have happened at all. But inside the hive, something went wrong. The forward edge of the wedge received its attack command on schedule. 700 milliseconds later, the flanks received theirs. But the flanks waited for a simultaneous command, and the delay read to every flank ship as an error in their own receiving systems. The hive confirmed everything was operational. The command was sent again. 4 seconds lost. The forward edge advanced. The flanks checked again. 3 seconds more. The forward edge was now 7.4 seconds ahead of the flanks with which it was supposed to be equal, which meant the forward edge was exposed on both sides in a breach, so small it wouldn't have mattered in any ordinary engagement. But the coalition fleet was already moving, and the human ships were already targeting it, and the breach was real. A breach that lasted 7.4 seconds. The coalition fleet struck the exposed front of the K'rat advance. Vet had been in battles before. He had been in 37 engagements over 3 years of war, and he knew what a battle felt like when you were losing. The feeling of the ground slipping from beneath you, answers coming too slowly, your own strength constricting while the enemy's not. This was not that. This was something for which he had no prior framework. The coalition fleet struck the exposed front of the K'rat advance with everything, and the human ships struck the flanks from angles the denser K'rat formation hadn't accounted for, because the angles hadn't existed in any K'rat engagement data before. And the K'rat forward edge stopped for the first time in 3 years, stopped in space in the middle of an offensive. The forward edge took the hit and fired back, and the coalition took damage. They always took damage. The K'rat were huge and well-armed and feared nothing, or hadn't feared, until recently. But the forward edge did not break through. The hive processed this, sent new orders. The flanks received them 7.4 seconds later. The flanks moved to support the forward edge. By the time they arrived at their commanded positions, the positions were wrong, because the engagement had moved. The hive recalculated, sent new orders 7.4 seconds later, again and again. Every new command arrived just late enough behind events that it didn't quite address the situation for which it was sent. The hive was fighting a battle it had analyzed 7 seconds ago, not the battle that was happening now. It was chasing its own data, perfectly and uselessly precise. It had never chased its own data before. It didn't know how to stop. On the bridge of the Adamant, Kane watched the tactical feed and said very little. She had done this before, not with the K'rat, but she had spent her life finding seams in things, points where a system's design became its vulnerability, and she saw what happened when a thing built to be always right suddenly collided with the fact that it was wrong. Processing cost, stupor, the moment where the system's confidence in itself became a trap. The K'rat had been certain they were right for 2,000 years. Being wrong was catastrophic for a thing that had never practiced it. "Senna," she said, "how long until they burn through the lag?" Senna's pen moved in short, fast strokes. "The procedure is degrading. They are adapting the node around it in." She made the calculation. 40, maybe 50 minutes. 40 minutes. Plus or minus. Kane watched the battle. The coalition was pushing hard into the exposed forward edge. Harlan's squadron was deep in the K'rat flanks now, burning with a ferocity that Kane watched and understood and felt something complex about. She had built these soldiers. She had trained them, chosen them, trusted them with missions no one else was asked to do. And she had brought them here, to a war that wasn't theirs, because she looked at the data and understood what was coming if no one came. She didn't let herself think about those who wouldn't return. Not now. That was for later, for the silence after. "Hit them with the reserve squadron," she said. "Everything, now. We aren't waiting for the flanks to finish. We are going through the center while it is broken, and we are not stopping." The reserve squadron received the order. 12 coalition ships and all 12 human ships, straight into the center of the K'rat through it. The K'rat center had never been struck from the inside before. The formation was built on the assumption of external attack. The center was the most protected position from the outside and the least protected from the inside, because nothing had ever made it from the inside. The formation always held its shape, always presented an unbroken front, always prevented the penetration of any force far enough to reach the center. The coalition pushed from the outside. The human ships pushed from the flanks. And something happened in the K'rat formation that the Hive's analysis would spend a very long time processing later. Individual ships broke formation not in retreat. Not because they were ordered to, but because the simultaneous pressure from multiple directions, arriving in fragmented timing, the pattern of which the Hive's coordination couldn't resolve fast enough, produced conflicting commands between which individual ships had to choose. The K'rat didn't choose as individuals. They weren't built for that. When the Hive's commands conflicted, ships that received conflicting instructions froze held position, while the Hive resolved the conflict, which was safe behavior, correct behavior, behavior that always worked. It didn't work now. Stuck ships in a moving formation became obstacles. Ships behind them had to redirect. Redirections fed new positional data back to the Hive, which had to reprocess, sending new orders that arrived 7.4 seconds later into a formation that had already changed shape again. The K'rat offensive, which had moved like a single organism for 3 years, developed breaches, real breaches, open space inside the formation where there had never been open space before. Coalition ships found them, passed through them. The formation warped. Aboard the leading K'rat command vessel, the coordination units that served as local nodes of the Hive's processing were conducting continuous analysis of the engagement. They had been conducting this analysis for 22 minutes now, and the analysis continued to produce a result for which the coordination units had no precedent. The result was, the enemy is behaving contrary to all engagement models. The coordination units presented this result to the Hive. The Hive cross-referenced its historical database. It pulled every engagement in its 2,000-year record that involved a numerically smaller, superior force using unexpected tactics. There were many such records. The K'rat had encountered unexpected tactics before, adapted, and won. But the database produced something new when it filtered for the engagement's current adaptation speed. Most species the K'rat had encountered, even smart ones, even those that surprised them once or twice, had a pattern. Surprise was a finite thing. They had one trick or two. The Hive studied the trick. The Hive adapted. The species fell. The human ships in the current engagement had used 7 different tactical approaches in 22 minutes. Each was different from the previous. Not variations on a theme, different engines, different geometry, different conceptual approach. 7 different approaches. Not because they had a list of 7 tricks, but because they read the engagement in real time and reacted to what they saw instead of following a plan. The Hive had no word for this. The closest concept in its database was uncontrolled reaction. But it wasn't uncontrolled. It was controlled. It was precise. It just didn't follow any template the Hive could find. The Hive pulled its records on human history. 2,000 years of K'rat records, 60 years of humanity in space. Before that, planetary history that the K'rat had collected from outpost intelligence reports and secondary sources. Wars, near extinction, recovery. The Hive hadn't prioritized human history before. 60 years in space. They were new. They were small. The Hive read the history now, all of it. In the 17 seconds that the K'rat collective processing dedicated to this review with 630 ships involved in a breaking battle, the Hive came to a conclusion it had never reached in 2,000 years of conquest. This species had been doing this to each other for 1,000 years. This wasn't a new tactic. This wasn't an adaptation created for this engagement. This wasn't innovation under pressure. This was what they were. This was how they had always worked. They had spent 1,000 years fighting each other with every possible weapon, every possible strategy, every possible environment. They had exhausted opponents who could surprise them because they were each other's worst opponents for millennia. They had, through sheer, catastrophic, repetitive war, become optimized for exactly this: chaos, uncertainty, multi-directional threat, a place where all plans break and only judgment and reflex remain. The Hive had met many warriors. The Hive had never met a species for whom war was a home field. The conclusion categorized itself into a new category, the one with only 3 other entries in 2,000 years: unknown mechanism of action. And then, for the first time in its history, the Hive did something for which it had no entry in its database. It began to calculate the cost of continuing this engagement, the improbability of victory, not tactical options cost. What it would lose to push forward against what it couldn't fully model, couldn't adapt to fast enough, couldn't predict. The Hive had never asked this question before. Asking it was a kind of answer. The K'rat formation retreated. Not a retreat in the way the coalition understood retreat. The K'rat didn't break. They compressed, reorganized, moved to a controlled distance, and reformed cleanly and precisely, even in retreat. But they moved away. For the first time in 3 years, 630 ships turned away from a target they had committed to take. In the war room of the Eternal Tide, no one spoke for a full 10 seconds. Then Commander Fell made a sound that wasn't a word. He exhaled very slowly. Vet stood at the viewport and watched the K'rat fleet compressing and retreating, and he felt all 3 years of the war sitting in his chest simultaneously. The weight of it, the dead of it, the wood from the dead world of it. And he didn't move for a long time. Kane's voice came through his comms. "They aren't finished," she said. "They will return." "I know," he said, "but they will return differently. They will hesitate. They will calculate the cost before committing. That is new." A pause. "A hive that doubts itself is a hive that can lose. We can make them do it again. Every time," she said. "Every time they see us, they have to run a calculation for which they have no good data. And every time they run that calculation, they lose time, confidence, and coordination." Another pause. "We just need to keep being ourselves." He heard something in her voice, not triumph, something quieter, something that had been paid for. "How many did you lose?" he said. She was silent for a moment. 3 ships, she said. 17 confirmed crews. More still unaccounted for. Vet closed his eyes. "They will be recorded," he said. "Our tradition. Those who gave their lives voluntarily." "Thank you," Kane said. "Only that. Nothing more." That night, the night after the battle, the night the K'rat retreated for the 3rd time in 25 days, Vet walked through the Eternal Tide, and he found Sergeant Harlan sitting in the hallway outside the medical bay. Not wounded, just sitting, back against the wall, long legs stretched out, a cup of something dark in his hands. His eyes were looking at a middle distance where there was nothing to see. Vet sat down next to him. He didn't ask why Harlan was sitting in the hallway. He had commanded enough soldiers to know that sometimes you sit in hallways because rooms are too full of the shape of someone who isn't here anymore. They sat in silence for a while. "Your home planet," Vet said eventually. "You nearly lost it twice." Harlan looked at him. "How do you continue after something like that?" Harlan was quiet. He looked at his cup. "You just do," he said. "You clean up what you can, and you rebuild what you can, and you are different after, and you know you are different, and you keep going, despite everything." He paused. "There is no secret to it. It is just the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. Is that what you teach your soldiers?" "I don't teach them anything," Harlan said. "They already know it. Everyone knows it. You just have to decide whether to use it or not." Vet thought about it. "The K'rat fear you," he said. "I believe it now. I read the intercept Senna pulled from the node before we disabled it. The Hive is running new calculations. It never calculated costs before." Harlan didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who had heard something he expected to hear and didn't find it satisfying, the way satisfaction was supposed to feel. "Good," he said flatly. "Does it help to know?" Vet asked. Harlan thought about it for a real moment, an impolite pause, a real consideration. 17 of my people are gone, he said. That doesn't help with that. No, Vet said. No, it doesn't. They sat in the hallway together for a while longer. The lights were dim. The ship moved through the cosmos. Somewhere in the deep dark, the K'rat fleet was regrouping, recalculating, putting humans into a category that didn't have good answers yet. It wouldn't have good answers tomorrow or the day after. The coalition began planning the next engagement before the current one was fully recorded. They had a list, a long list, the one Kane had mentioned on that first night when she stepped out of her blunt, dark shuttle and looked at everything in the docking bay and asked for combat records before she asked about anything else. The list still had many items on it. The K'rat had 60 years of human behavior in space to study. They didn't have 1,000 years before that. It was the same. It was always going to be the same. 3 months after the battle at Achievement 7, a species called the Delvari sent a message to the Vahari coalition. The Delvari were an old species, 3,000 years in space, powerful, cautious, and uninvolved. They had watched the war from the sidelines and made no moves to join it. Their message was brief. It said, "We would like to speak with the human general. After the Delvari came the Shen. After the Shen came the Mortek Collective. After the Mortek Collective came 4 more species in the next 6 weeks. Each of them had watched what the humans were doing to the K'rat. And each of them sent the same cautious, diplomatic message. We don't want to join the coalition. We don't want to fight. We just want to speak with the humans." Vet watched the messages arrive, and he felt something that wasn't simple. He felt it because he was glad. He was sincerely, deeply glad. The way you are glad when the tide that has been against you for 3 years finally, slowly starts to turn. Each new species that reached out was another piece of ground the K'rat had to hold against a growing threat. Each new ship was a window that could be held open. He felt it because he understood what it meant. These species weren't reaching out to the coalition. They weren't asking for an alliance in the traditional sense, that which is built on treaties and shared interests and cautious balancing of costs and benefits. They were reaching out to the humans specifically because the humans had done something no one in this part of the galaxy had managed for 3 years. They made the K'rat hesitate. They made the Hive calculate costs. They had, in 25 days, changed the shape of a war that had been a slow, certain death march for 3 years. And everyone watching from the sidelines had noticed. They wanted to stand next to the humans who had managed that. Vet called Kane. She was, as usual, already at the tactical display. "The Delvari are requesting a meeting," he said. "I know. I read the message." She didn't look up from the display. "They are good fighters. Old military tradition. They held the K'rat at their border for 400 years. Will you meet with them?" She looked up. Her dark eyes were firm and working, as they always were. The gears were always moving. "We will meet with everyone," she said. "Every species that wants to talk. And you will tell them the truth," she said. "That the K'rat can be beaten. That they have a seam like any other thing, that it requires patience and creativity and a very high tolerance for being in terrible situations." She paused. "And that they must be ready to keep going when it is bad. That is the part most species haven't figured out." "And you have?" Vet said. She was silent for a moment, the silence of a person deciding whether the question deserved a simple answer or a truthful one. "We have had a lot of practice," she said, not proudly, not boastfully. She spoke the way she said most things. Like a fact she had come to through experience, the kind of experience that left scars, the kind that didn't allow for simple pride. Vet nodded, though she couldn't see it. He thought about the chair. He thought about the wood from the dead world. He thought about all the dead worlds and all the dead crews of the Steadfast and its 11 minutes, and the 3 years of loss that preceded the 25 days of something else. He thought about what it meant that a species so young, so small, with so much of its own terrible history still raw behind them, had come here to a war that wasn't theirs with 12 ships and a list, and a sergeant with a broken and healed face who sat in hallways and said, "You just do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing." He thought he understood now why the K'rat were afraid. It wasn't the tactics, it wasn't the creativity or adaptability or the 11 years of practiced infiltration that made a man walk through secured space as if he weren't there. It was simpler than that. The K'rat were afraid because they had found something for which they couldn't calculate an end, something that had already survived its own extinction twice, that emerged from every catastrophe different, harder, and continuing to move, that didn't know how to stop fighting, just as deep water doesn't know how to stay still. The Hive had asked, for the first time in 2,000 years, what will this cost us? The answer was a problem. The answer was, we don't know, and we don't know when this stops, and we don't know what this becomes next. The K'rat had consumed 2,000 years of other species' history. They had just met a species with no bottom. Outside the Eternal Tide's viewport, the stars burned. The K'rat fleet was somewhere out there regrouped, patient, and calculating, building a new answer. The coalition was building. 2 more systems, more allies, a list working its way down through ideas that had never been tried in this war because this war had never had humans before. Somewhere in the hallway outside the medical bay, a sergeant with a broken face drank something dark from a cup and thought about the next step. Only the next thing, and the next.